Last week, just a quick review, we finished up the little bit that we had to say about communication and just a couple of summary thoughts from that lesson. Of course, as Christians, we have commands for this, so we don't really have a choice, but should always choose communication over gossip. You don't need to know everything. So just because you don't does not mean that communication has not happened. And then we moved on to the process of selecting elders. And a couple of the points from where we got last week, that is a crucial moment in the life of the congregation because choosing elders and appointing elders is not something that happens on a whim. The equivalent in our own government is the appointing of Supreme Court justices, because pretty much once it's done, it's done. There is no specified method or procedure in the scriptures for selecting elders. We usually follow the method in which deacons were chosen because we know it has approval and it worked well. So that's at least a good guide to follow. And we talked about, in that process, the congregation reviews the standards, which we have done. And there will be conflicting views, and that's the part of the discussion that we're still sort of in the middle of. An important reminder for us, though, is we must be honest with ourselves in evaluating our views. Be sure that we're making our judgment based on actual scripture and scriptural standards rather than a personal preference of some kind. So that gets us to, I couldn't remember, last week's recording got overwritten unintentionally, so I couldn't remember exactly where we left off. So I did my best to guess. I think we did start talking about this idea of how practical is it for a congregation to function only when no personally held beliefs of the weakest brother are violated. Probably impossible, because we made the point that even here, I know that there are people coming and worshiping, even though personally held beliefs that they have, violations of those beliefs happen, but they put them aside and are willing to work through that anyway. So the point of that question is 100% agreement. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the bigger your group gets, the less likely it is to happen. And we talked about if a brother, and we talked about this in that sermon as well, and Paul more or less said it, the brother that thinks something is wrong with meat that was served to the idol, he's the one that has the incorrect view. However, that does not mean we need to trample on his view and ignore what he thinks. But at some point, you've got to make a decision. And if that were to come up, I haven't ever heard of it coming up, but if that were to come up where someone had been asked to consider serving as an elder and they were a happy carnivore, right? But then some member of the congregation had that view that eating meat was unscriptural or wrong, at that point you'd have to say, well, look, even Paul said eating the meat is not wrong. So we have to be, it's a balance. We have to be considerate of people's thoughts and feelings, but at the same time, especially if it's not scripturally based, we can't let them hold the whole group hostage as well. We talked about that already. So some things we need to ask. If we find, if Brother Smith has been put forward and the majority of the congregation says, oh, Brother Smith's a great choice, but you think Brother Smith maybe not is a great choice, you have to ask yourself some questions. First of all, is it possible that you've drawn the wrong conclusion about Brother Smith on whatever the matter is? Okay, ask yourself, why do so many others see this issue differently than I do? However, as I pointed out, truth is not decided on majority rule, and there's plenty of examples from the scriptures of where the majority was wrong. Okay, but still, it can be an indicator that said maybe I need to look at this again. Ask yourself, do I have the right to demand that the entire congregation bend to my personal standards? Okay. Skip that one. Is my conviction in this matter worth creating congregational strife? And that's pretty much... Now, to me, this is important. Will this absolutely violate my conscience so that I cannot continue to serve the Lord acceptably in this congregation? Because if you do something that violates your conscience, it's wrong for you. It's a sin for you. And you may find yourself at that point. And, the determination of competent leadership is based on group consensus. I mean, what other option do we have, right? God is not going to help us cast lots, okay? That option is not open to us, okay? But we really have no other basis for choosing other than a group consensus. And it doesn't really, apparently, we're not told when they chose, in Acts chapter 6, when they chose the men to take care of the Grecian widows, it doesn't speak of anything of any kind of, other than the apostle said, you choose from amongst yourself. We're not told whether there was any discussion, any conflict, anybody saying, well, I don't think Philip's a very good choice because, or, whatever. So group consensus, is kind of how things work. And we do see disagreement. What's a famous disagreement from the New Testament where they couldn't come to a consensus? John Mark, right? Paul and Barnabas were at conflict over whether John Mark should go with them again. And they came up with a solution, but, they didn't have group consensus there. So, even though, I may personally have some sort of reservation, and I share that, I share it with the person, I share it with the current elders, but the rest of the group says, no, we think he's a good choice, then, they're not going to override the wishes of the congregation for the wishes of one person, or the thoughts of one person. And at that point, that if I was the dissenting individual, I have to decide, is it going to violate my conscience to submit to this person as an elder? Or, can I defer to the judgment of the group? Okay. So here's a question then. If a man believes he is qualified, but the congregation is divided on his selection, can he or should he insist on being chosen? Thundering silence.
Well, I think that would be a matter of the individual that's stated up here, would be a matter of his own conscience.
Of the person who was put forward but wasn't chosen?
Yes. There's also other circumstances. That's me.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were right there.
No, I said there's other circumstances involved too. if they don't have any, and he looks like, and he knows there's gonna be somebody else that, that might be, we need to do this, whereas if they already have some,
Elders.
and elders, and he wants to become one too, that might be a different story.
Okay.
I think it's a matter of degree too, right? I mean, I don't know, it doesn't say what the numerical value of this division is, but if you're facing some sort of 50-50 opposition and you're trying to generate group consensus, it probably would be wise for that person to say, well, okay, this is probably not best for the group. But if we're talking about, one stick in the mud over there who's...
Okay, I guess the question's not clear. This is more than one stick in the mud. So go ahead. Go ahead with the idea that it's more than one stick in the mud.
Well, I think I would not want to put, it's kind of like in a lot of legislative proceedings, they don't bring a vote to the floor if they know it's unlikely to pass, because why put everybody through that kind of embarrassing procedure for the vote to fail? It's kind of like, well, unless there's a certain expectation that this is going to go well and that there's going to be a general agreement, why should we drag all of these people through this process? And you got to think too, like the man who's under consideration, if there's this opposition, I'm sure there's going to be opportunity for people to say things about him that are going to cause pain and lingering hurt and things like that. So it's kind of like, well, why then would you want to put anyone through that situation if there's this much opposition? Perhaps the man should spend some time in introspection, but perhaps it could also be that the congregation was incorrect about these things, but at which time, what do you do except try to continue to show forth the good qualities that would show your eligibility? I don't know. It's just, I think I would not perceive if there was a certain level of disagreement.
Isn't an elder supposed to be a humble person? If he is, he shouldn't be insistent, I'm the one.
Right.
That's an egotistical kind of thing. And
Okay, I know,
I'm sorry.
So sorry. I think that in a case like what I think is under discussion, that it is important for the leadership to guide the congregation towards a proper outcome. It may be that the congregation needs to learn that they need to judge based on the qualifications and judge correctly. And it may be that that someone needs to be patient while such learning takes place.
Okay.
Yeah, what he said. Just from the standpoint of, if you have a divided congregation, it's really an invitation to continue the dialogue. There's this sense of finality where this either or point in this question, and really it just means maybe we need to consider this, in talking about one's conscience earlier, a conscience can be educated. So if a person believes they can't eat meat, their conscience can be educated so that they can come to a point where they believe that they can eat meat, or that it's okay for others to eat meat. And so in issues where someone has a problem with something that's based on their own conscience, then we would continue the dialogue to try to address that issue. And so and the word insist is sort of sounds like a power trip. Just the word itself, I think, maybe taints the question a little bit, because it may be just a question of choosing to proceed forward versus insisting. Because insisting sounds like you're powering your way into something.
Well, and the question is born of the recognition that humans are going to be human from time to time. And Brady, I think.
I was just gonna say, one of the qualifications for an elder is desiring that position, and I think it's a valid question to ask, why? Why do you desire that position? Because if somebody's insisting, they may not be desiring it for the right reason.
Okay? Ashton?
I already spoke once, but.
That's okay.
I agree with that, and I think that it's also important, it's inherent in what Brady said, that there could be a bad reason for desiring the office, and there could be a good reason for desiring the office. And I also wanted to mention that, I think it's in Acts 20, that Paul was speaking to the Ephesian elders, and he said, you know, basically to shepherd the flock over which the Holy Ghost had made them overseers. And the congregation in a situation like this would need to realize that God chose the qualifications to select people. And if we don't use the qualifications to make the assessment, or if we're coming out on a different side of it than God intends, then we're opposing the selection by God.
Okay. Any hands over here while I was turned? Okay.
Scott, I do have
yes.
something. So sort of dovetailing on what Brady was saying, that with the desire and everything, I think that if someone, the insist thing, if they're insisting, then I think it does, and I think somebody else mentioned this too, that introspection, you know, like if it is, you said that there were multiple, it wasn't just one holdout, like Jeremy was saying, if there are multiple people, then maybe that should give you cause for pause and self-reflect and say, okay, why is 50% or why are 50% or 60%, you know, against this, or what is their issue, and maybe I should self-reflect and realize that I need to make some changes, or to prove myself that, you know, if, because I'm assuming with this that the nays are based on the qualifications, you know, and it is scriptural, so what are their reasons, and trying to understand both sides.
Yeah. And I've got a little piece on that at the end of the lesson as well. But you're exactly right. All right, so the method of selection, as I already said, there is no stipulated process to follow. Okay, we have the qualifications, and that's what we have. So somehow men need to be identified as having a substantial level of support from the congregation, and it's done, and I've seen it done in different ways, some more formally than in other places, but somehow you ask the members to list or name somebody who they feel might be qualified. Okay, we have had, the elders and deacons and myself have had one discussion about this, and there's no saying that this form will be used, but you may get something like a form where you either say, like I said, there's no consensus on using this or not, but it was floated. Either there's no one you want to nominate at this time, or you write some names down and turn it in, okay? Or they may choose, it may be chosen like it has been done here in the past, just very informally, you know. I think personal feeling is that's too informal, but you know, if that's what we're asked to do, that's how we'll do it. You know, then some figure is determined. You know, again, there's no figure from the Bible, 50s, 40, 50, 60, right? And the reason I got this idea from somebody else's material, and their reasoning is, if you have, let's say, 100 members, right, and you're at this point, and one man's name, only one person puts it forward, you know, that kind of doesn't indicate, with the thinking that if you have grown as a man to the point where you meet these qualifications, the congregation recognizes that beforehand, don't you think? I mean, they've recognized that you've grown to this point. So if you're at this point to ask for names, and one person's name is only put in one time, you know, I'm not drawing any lines or anything, but maybe that's an indication that it's not time yet or something. Often the congregation will be given a window of time to individually meet with the men whom they consider to be of questionable qualification. So, you know, again, they'll say Brother Smith's name has been put forward over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever the time limit is. If you have questions of Brother Smith, you know, please meet with him during the next 2 to 3 weeks so that we can move ahead. Something like that. Ashton.
I think it's important not to assume that you're going to get the level of participation from the congregation that would be healthy.
And I hope I've been stressing that enough, but I mean, I think it was last week that I said, if you don't participate, and we say this flippantly about our politicians, and it's true there, but it's true here also. If you don't participate, you're kind of stuck with what you get. I mean, maybe that sounds a little harsh to be using it in this application, but why would you not participate, I guess, would be the question. I mean, you recognize the need, I hope, that you recognize that this is God's desire that the congregation be organized and led in this way. So, you know, why would you miss an opportunity to, you know, and I realize in politics, some people, and I'm sure that happened this past November, some people didn't like either choice and they just didn't vote. But I hope that you would not pass up the opportunity to have your voice heard. Because the example from Acts 6 shows that Paul thought it was important for the group's voices to be heard. He said, choose from among yourselves. We're not going to tell you who to choose. You work it out. So there had to have been some discussion going on for that to take place. So, one more time. Please participate in the process.
This is not a fully formed thought, but I guess I've not really liked the period of time given, and if you have an objection or something, it's your responsibility to. I think we've begun to recognize that we put stumbling blocks in front of people for things that are important to do by fighting against human nature. Like, I think it's over the past couple of years, a lot of us have started trying to emphasize that if you feel pricked in your heart and you want to confess something, or if you want to give yourself to the Lord or whatever, it is not a necessity that you stand up in front of this entire congregation right this minute and walk to the floor and say whatever this horrible thing is, and that there are other ways, but don't leave without talking to someone to take care of this. I think that's a concession towards recognizing that you're putting an additional burden or stumbling block in front of somebody to do this thing that they should do. I wonder if there's not a better way to do it than say it's incumbent upon you to pick up your phone and cold call this member who might be 35 years your senior to ask invasive questions about their marriage. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if there's a more comfortable way to facilitate some of this exploration.
So you don't like the time frame?
No, I'm saying I wonder if we could consider how can we facilitate these types of discussions without making it a very uncomfortable social thing. If that makes sense.
I don't know. I mean, when it's one member having an issue with another member outside the realm of choosing an elder, I mean, that's how you do it. Right?
Well,
You let them know you want to talk to them.
Do you have an idea of how else it could be done?
I don't know. I was just thinking more of, I mean, we run certain risks by having some sort of open forum, but,
But that's the equivalent of you saying the old time practice was, come down as we stand and sing. Yeah, that would be the equivalent of that.
I was thinking more like, again, I'm not necessarily proposing anything, but if there are 4 or 5 people who said, hey, I think this man is qualified, to have them stand up in a group and say, hey, I put forward X, Y, and Z. This is how I see that he meets these qualities and considerations. And to have, I don't know, those testimonials from several people, I think would begin to stimulate some more productive discussion. I mean, that's just, I said this is a half-baked thought, but it just occurs to me that asking people to just out of the blue pick up their phone and ask, questions of private nature is asking a lot.
I think that would open you up to things being said to other people before they were said to the person under consideration, and which should not be. I will tell you, one time I was at a place where a young man was preaching, and he just wasn't rising to the occasion in a lot of areas like he should have. Not to the degree of out and out sin, but to the degree there's a lot of mumbling and complaining, but nobody would go to him and say whatever they wanted to say. And so I tried to do, and people were coming to me, and I was just a guy in the seat, but I finally said, okay, let's get together and see what your concerns are, and said, you tell me what your concerns are, and I will go talk to him. Okay? And that went nuclear in my face. That approach did. Okay? And the reason I tried to do that is because I knew a lot of the older men were mad. I mean, they were coming from a place of anger, and if they met with him, it was going to be ugly, So I was trying to be a filter in between. And it blew up terribly. So I don't know. Ashton?
Well, I want to commend Jeremy's half-baked thought, because I think it's incredibly important to recognize human nature and try to take steps to acknowledge and accommodate people's weaknesses. Trying to, get to a point where we can work around or get through or past the tendency to bury your head in the sand or be afraid to have this kind of conversation with somebody or whatever it is. The other thought is, no one is in a better position to put people at ease about bringing concerns than the person who is the candidate.
Right.
If they tell people, and we should probably encourage candidates to do this, maybe let them say, once their name's been put forward, to say to the congregation, if anybody would like to speak to me, know that you will be received calmly and respectfully. And I'd prefer to hear from you as to have you, walk away and have concerns and not.
Yeah.
We never know that.
Susan?
It just reminds me, so in a professional situation, I have co-teachers, right? Like, so there'll be a regular classroom teacher and then maybe a special education teacher who comes in and to work together. And you would think that 2 professionals could do that, but they
You'd be
don't.
right.
They don't often have the skill set to approach each other and to recognize how to approach each other. And so we spend a lot of time helping people know how to have conversations. So I think that part of what Jeremy's coming to is these conversations are helpful toward those conversations. I think what Ashton said about disclosing, if the person says, the candidate says out loud, I am open to these conversations, that goes a long way toward building that bridge for people to feel comfortable saying what they need to say.
You mentioned timelines, and historically in this congregation, we've given a period of 2 weeks between nomination and confirmation. And we live busy lives, and not that there's anything more important than it can be hard to find the time or to process your own thoughts within that period. I advocate a longer period of time for these kinds of things to happen, particularly when you factor in the need to build up the courage to go talk to someone. And another thought is, you know, let's say like there's a question in some people's minds about an elder's qualification due to having previously been married. And we're all aware of a situation like that. And rather than, I felt like it was handled really well when that happened because it was just anticipated and a statement was made about it. So and that person didn't have to sit there and talk to 5 or 6 or 10 individuals kind of on repeat about the same issue that was brought forward and made known pretty much from the get-go.
So 2 things just to add on what everybody else said. First off, I think that if somebody's name is brought forward to be an elder, then if that person feels like there's anything in his life that disqualifies him, they should obviously bring that up and either address it or remove their name. And second off, speaking from personal experience, when some other congregations have chosen elders and deacons, instead of, you have a list of names. Okay, if anybody has a problem with these, you need to go speak to this. You take the list of names, and if anybody in the congregation has questions about that individual, you can take those questions to the elders. That way that one particular person is not having to answer to everybody at one time. That you have a list of names up there that have been chosen or presented to the church as possible elders. Then if anybody in the congregation has questions about any of those men, they can just take those questions to the elders, and then the elders can sit down once they've, in whatever time frame is decided upon, and then the elders can ask those questions. And that's kind of goes, solving the problem of having to make cold calls to somebody out of the blue, and if that makes sense.
Okay.
That that's what I wanted to add, was that in my scenario where we're talking about the 2 teachers in the classroom, it was incumbent on me as the building leader to ensure that whatever skill set was necessary, I built that.
Okay. Brent?
Okay, one last thing. Not just for elders, but for anything. If I, as a member of the congregation, am doing something that's not kosher with somebody here, I would hope that they would come tell me, I don't think that's kosher, and we could discuss it out. Well, here's why, I believe in this one. I ran into this a lot with the military congregations where you got all these different groups coming in, and it's like, well, I think this, and I don't appreciate that you think that, and so on and so forth. And we actually worked a lot of that out better than you would think that it would happen. You would think that.
But we all need to work on ourselves,
Right.
to facilitate that process overall.
If I could maybe redirect back to the first bullet point, I've been kind of mulling over that since that slide's been up. And, we're moving towards this moment of, hey, we're going to look for any candidates for elder or deacon. But ideally, I think this should be an ongoing process so that at any point, someone could enter, call it the nomination process. And you're not going to have necessarily everybody filling out ballots. It'll be somebody who expresses a desire. It might be somebody who says, hey, what about brother so-and-so? I think they would be good. And there's not going to be a host of ballots, we've got 40% or 50% or 60%. And then in terms of the process, there may be someone that maybe a plurality wouldn't list because in their mind there's some way that person's not qualified. But if that person goes through the process and answers the questions about those issues, about marital situation or whatever, and then that shifts, that percentage of consensus, of initial consensus will shift by going through the process. And I'll say this, it could go the other way.
Well, like I said, none of that is from the scripture. It's just ways that it's been done. What I will be giving you, no matter what the final process looks like, I've created these and I will give them to you maybe next week because I'll have to run copies. But to help you, I've made a couple of lists. There's all the qualifications from 1 Timothy 3. There's all the qualifications from Titus 1. Then there they are combined, where both places mention. And then I made a chart, and I just chose six translations, probably the most popular among the group here. And I listed them all here so you have one place to look at them. I would hope that you would do both, that you'd open the Bible, read all that again, but also if you have if you have a question or you want to see how it's worded somewhere else, just to remind yourself, what is this about? Okay. So I will give these to you just to help you. These are not for voting or anything. They're just to remind you of what we've talked about.
Well done.
Okay, I guess I forgot to turn on my animations for the end of the thing. Okay, so if we have some kind of impasse, we need to, Brady and Phil may need to say, well, let's wait a couple more weeks and see if we can talk through this. Now, if the issue involves sinful behavior, and that is unquestionably established, and we've already talked about how you do that, then the prospective elder should deal with that in the manner prescribed by the scriptures. Okay? If the charges are matters of judgment, then the disagreeing brothers should defer to the will of the group. If you can't do that, he has really no further. He can't keep harping on Brother Smith eats meat, right? At some point, he's got to let it go. Okay. And then if things are worked out, then Now, here's what Leslie was talking about, and a couple of you others. Selecting men to serve as elders or deacons is a sensitive process that can inflame emotions and hurt feelings. Okay? However, it's just like being a president, a vice president, right? Your whole family gets put under the microscope, right? And like we've just said a few minutes ago, all of us, many of us perhaps, are not where we should be in our ability to handle feedback. So being rejected can be traumatic. And somebody said this earlier, anybody who objects to not being appointed usually vindicates the judgment of the group not to consider him. Now, this is a little thing. You see this a lot in elementary school buildings, the power of yet. If you thought it was your time and you thought, okay, I'm going to be selected and asked to serve as an elder, and you weren't, okay? This little thing is up, okay? You might say to yourself, I can't do this. Or you can say, I can't do this yet, right? I'm not ready for this. That's what everyone thinks. I'm not ready for this. Or you can say, I'm not ready for this yet. You take that and think about this. How often did Jesus reprimand his disciples, yet they stayed with him? Anyone ever counted the "oh, you a little faith" statements in the, right? He reprimanded them all the time, and they stayed with him, all the way through. Okay, so that's something to think about. And then finally, James 1:25, the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. Someone comes to you and says, I don't think you're humble enough yet. I think you have a humility problem. Do you bow up and say, and prove them right? Or do you take what James says and say, all right, let me go through the scriptures and let me keep studying and working on humility, or whatever it is, okay? James is saying in there, it's a mirror, right? Use it as a mirror. That's the point Leslie was making as well. That self-reflection, okay? You thought this would be your time or whatever, and it turns out it's not. Take those comments seriously and do what you need to do to improve. Any final thoughts? Ashton? Oh.
I like bringing Jesus and the disciples up because it made me think about the fact that he was continually working on them to improve their spiritual health. And I think it's important in whatever the situation is, if someone is not selected at the moment, for the elders to take the lead in promoting spiritual health, both in the person who's rejected and in the congregation. Because it may be that there's an improvement to be made all around.
Okay, great.
I was just gonna say that I think a lot of this is the responsibility of the candidate. And I say that because I don't know, a lot of, if not most of the qualifications are a judgment call on this. And I don't know, having recently gone through this, if anybody had come to me and say, hey, I have a concern, I would have thrown the brakes on them pretty quick and said, let's stop and look at this and let me work on this. So I guess I'm saying a lot of this is the responsibility of that man to do that.
Okay. All right, so that's it on this whole study. You can cheer later that we're finished. So next week, Jeremy's going to do a standalone lesson. Is that correct? Okay, and then the 23rd, Brady will begin teaching on attitude. Is that what you can? Okay, so that'd be a nice follow-up. The elders and deacons will be meeting again sometime this month, and I guess letting the congregation know where we stand in this process.